لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله.
You've heard many sayings in English that there's no place like home, right? You say that, there's no place like home. And the reason for that is because it is your home. You can go to the poshest resort, the most expensive resort, the nicest, holiday area, go for a vacation. But at the end of the day, after a week, 2 weeks, you start yearning to get back home again. Because that's where your heart is. That's where you want to be. Provided that house is actually a place of peace. Provided that you have actually made an effort to make it a place of peace. So making a house full of peace is important. And there are certain reasons for that. The first thing is that the environment in the household has to be conducive to saving ourselves and our families from the hellfire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nar. O people of Iman, save yourselves and your families from the hellfire. Not just yourselves, your families also. It's your responsibility to do that. Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyati. It is a responsibility upon us. The Prophet ﷺ, he said this hadith that all of you are guardians and all of you will be questioned about their subordinates. So the Imam is going to be questioned about his community. The king is going to be questioned about his kingdom. The husband is going to be questioned about his wife. The parents are going to be questioned about their children. Any responsibility that you're given, you're going to be questioned about it. That's why in Arabic also, a person who's in charge of something, he is called mas'ul. He is called mas'ul. Why? The word mas'ul is from the word sa'ala. The person who's questioned, he will be questioned about that responsibility. He is the one that people are going to turn to. As the saying is famous in America, the buck stops at the person who's responsible. That's where the buck stops. That's where the responsibility lies. The Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith similar, إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى سَائِلٌ كُلَّ رَاعٍ عَمَّا اسْتَرْعَاهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask every ra'i, every person who is responsible about his subordinates. أَحَفِظَ ذَلِكَ أَمْ ضَيَّعَ. Did he take care of that responsibility or did he waste that responsibility? So that's the second reason, that we have to fulfill this responsibility of taking care of our subordinates. That's why it's important to have a peaceful house. The house is the place where we preserve ourselves, where we save ourselves from the elements, from the heat, the cold, and also from the evil that comes out from outside. That is where we protect ourselves from. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned this in the hadith. He said, طُوبَى لِمَنْ مَلَكَ لِسَانَهُ وَوَسَعَهُ بَيْتُهُ وَبَكَى عَلَى خَطِيَّتِهِ. Glad tidings are for that person who controlled his tongue from saying wrong things. And his house was sufficient for him. His house was sufficient for him, and he cried upon his mistakes. He cried upon the sins that he committed. And in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, سَلَامَةُ الرَّجُلِ فِي الْفِتْنَةِ إِنْ يَلْزَمَ بَيْتَهُ. That when the time for fitna comes, when the time for trials and tribulations comes, that is the time when a person should stay in his house. So when the house is not even conducive to Islam, and Islam is not being practiced there, then what kind of a house is it that it's not protecting a person from the outside evils, and inside the house is not being protected from evils? So therefore, there's something wrong there. At least the inside of the house should be a protective environment from the evils that are coming from outside. And fifth, and the most important thing is that each and every household is actually a brick in the fabric of society. the whole of the society is basically made up of all households. My household, your household, everybody here, they have their own household. All of these households combined, they make up what we know as society. When each one of us is trying to fix our own house, and every single person within each household takes care of that responsibility of fixing his own household, then we will have a wonderful society. All of the bricks are going to be in place to make this wonderful society, which can be a productive society and one which inclines towards good and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once our brick, the brick that we have, is corrupted, then it gives way to corrupting other bricks too. Like the foundation of a house, if it's weak, then the rest of the house becomes weak too. Okay, we have that problem in Texas of foundations. So you've probably seen that in houses that have cracked walls, etc. That is basically the thing that we need to worry about spiritually within our household. When that foundation crumbles, then the rest of the house also crumbles. Now, some of the things that I'm going to mention in building this peaceful household, you've probably heard them before, but there's no harm in repeating them, because وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَى تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind each other, because reminder is beneficial for the people of Iman, and you never know, I might say something that you may not have heard before. The main thing is, not that I've heard this all before, the question is, how much have I implemented what I've heard before? That is the thing that we need to keep in mind. So the first thing is, to make productive and a peaceful household, the Prophet ﷺ, he basically went right to the foundation of the matter. And he said that before you make a household, you look at the people who are going to be in charge of that household. And that is basically a husband and a wife. And in both cases, the Prophet ﷺ gave us guidelines as to who we should marry. The Prophet ﷺ, he said a hadith which you've probably heard before many times. تُنْكَحُ الْمَرْأَةُ لِأَرْبَعَةٍ لِمَالِهَا وَلِجَمَالِهَا وَلِحَسَبِهَا وَلِدِينِهَا فَاظْفُرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكَ. A woman is married for 4 reasons. For her beauty, for her wealth, for her family status, and for her deen. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned deen the last, because more often than not, it is the thing that we take into account the last. The Prophet ﷺ said, فَاظْفُرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ. Become successful by marrying the one who has deen in her. And that goes for the women looking for a husband too, which I'll mention in a minute. Marry the woman who has deen in her, تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكَ. Otherwise your hands will become soiled, you will become unsuccessful. So these are the things that we need to keep in mind. Yes, if all 4 qualities are found in a woman, or 2 or 3 of the qualities are found in a woman, then that's wonderful. But the thing that needs to be given priority first and foremost is the deen. Otherwise, all of the rest of the things, how long will the beauty last? 5 years, 10 years? If that beauty is not accompanied by a good character, by a person that you can talk to in the morning, by a person that you can laugh with and joke with, then that is not a marriage. That is not a marriage. That is basically 2 different individuals living under the same roof. That's very, very important. When you are looking to get married to a person, you need to think to yourself, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, irrespective of what he or she is going to look like, am I going to enjoy the company of this person? Because initially what happens in a marriage or in any relationship, the first couple of years, that relationship is based upon lust. That's not love. We call it love. I love you when you send yourself like fluffy teddy bears and, cards with love hearts all over them and all that kind of stuff. That's really not love. That is infatuation. And that is coupled with lust. Real love comes 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years after the marriage takes place. That's when real love takes place. When that person that you actually married, for whatever reason, that person becomes your friend. That person you converse with, you talk with, you enjoy their company. When you leave the house for the weekend or a week to go on business or for whatever reason, you yearn to come back because you miss their company, you miss being with them. That love doesn't come from the first instance. That love is something that comes later on, and that's what true love is. Okay? So we should not mix up this infatuation and lust with love, which comes much later on. This is for the youth, and maybe for the youthful amongst us, which are not really youth anymore. So in any case, the Prophet ﷺ said, become successful by marrying the one who has deen in her. And for the parents here, I know a lot of you have kids that are growing up, teenagers, 17, 18, 19, 20, probably looking to get married soon. I urge you, don't focus on materialistic gains when you get married. And unfortunately, this is very much the case. That kids, people, they look for doctors or, surgeons and engineers and what have you for their daughters and for their sons. This is not the criteria that we should be focusing on. If you get that, that's fine when it's coupled with deen, it's coupled with religion. If it's without religion, if it's without deen, then you could say that you are basically making life difficult for your son and daughter. Thinking that the materialistic lifestyle is going to provide for them and they're going to be happy with it. It's not going to happen. We need to look at all of these celebrities. They have everything. They have money, they have riches, they have fame, they have popularity, they have people that love them. But internally, they are miserable. They are miserable. And how often have you heard of a celebrity who is so popular and is loved by so many people, but we get the news that they've committed suicide? What didn't they have in their life that we presume to be the means of happiness? They had everything materialistic going for them. They had the mansions, they had the cars, they had the jewelry, they had the bank accounts. What they didn't have was that inner peace that they tried to fill. They tried to fill the void of that elusive peace with materialism. But when that didn't work, the only thing that they could find to escape and to find true peace, according to their assumption, was to leave this world and to get rid of it all, finish it off for themselves. And that is really my advice to the parents that are looking for husbands and wives for their sons and daughters. They need to keep in mind that materialism is not something that is going to make them happy. The Prophet ﷺ said, "الدنيا كلها متاع وخير متاع الدنيا المرأة الصالحة." The whole of the dunya is a mata'. It is a temporary benefit, and the best benefit is that a person gets a woman that is salihah, a wife that is pious. The Prophet ﷺ also said, لِيَتَّخِذْ أَحَدُكُمْ قَلْبًا شَاكِرًا وَلِسَانًا ذَاكِرًا وَزَوْجَةً مُؤْمِنَةً تُعِينُهُ عَلَى أَمْرِ الْآخِرَةِ. The Prophet ﷺ said that each one of you should hold fast to a grateful heart and a tongue that is remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and a wife that has iman in her, and she is such that she helps her husband on the matter of the akhirah. Prophet also said that تزوجوا الودود الولود فإني مكافر بكم الأنبياء يوم القيامة. Marry a woman who is loving and who gives many children, because I want to compete with the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam on the Day of Judgment in the size of my ummah. So, to have more children is a blessing. It's not a burden. We should try to have more children. We should realize that they are a barakah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They bring their own rizq. They bring their own sustenance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised that He will feed them. لا تقتلوا أولادكم خشية إملاق نحن نرزقكم وإياهم. Do not kill your children for fear of poverty, because we feed them and we will feed you. We give you rizq and sustenance, we will give them sustenance also. Every child comes with their own rizq and sustenance. Now, from the perspective of the male that comes to give a proposal for your daughter, for your sister, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا أَتَاكُمْ مَنْ تَرْضَوْنَ خُلُقَهُ وَدِينَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ. When a person comes to you and you like his deen and you like his manners, then get him married. Give him your daughter, give him your sister. إِلَّا تَفْعَلُ تَكُنْ فِتْنَةً فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ عَرِيضٌ. And if you don't do this, there's going to be corruption on the earth. There's going to be trials and tribulations and huge corruption. And we see this in societies. In societies where we have made marriage difficult. We have made the mahar of the woman huge that nobody can afford. We've made weddings expensive that nobody can afford to, conduct. This has resulted in people not getting married. When they don't get married, this opens the doors for all kinds of sins and all kinds of problems in society. It opens the doors for adultery and fornication. This is what the Prophet ﷺ was saying. But we need to go back and ponder over this hadith a little bit. The Prophet ﷺ said, the person whose akhlaq you like and deen you like, both things are there. And the Prophet ﷺ separated the two. In this case, he separated the two. Even though we know that deen and akhlaq basically go hand in hand. Akhlaq is a part of deen, but the Prophet ﷺ, he separated it. Why is that? Because when we see somebody, mashallah, he has a beard, he wears a jalabiyah or a turban, he comes to the masjid 5 times daily to pray, we assume that, mashallah, the ideal husband for my daughter. But this is not always the case. We really need to gauge him outside the masjid, to see how his life is outside the masjid, to see if he's honest in his dealings, to see what kind of character he has. You have to gauge his akhlaq and his deen. Not just his deen, but his akhlaq also. You never know, he could be an abusive person, thinking that to be abusive is part of religion. And even the Prophet ﷺ, sometimes when people used to come to him for advice about any prospective husband, he used to tell them the truth. And he was talking about Sahaba here. Can we imagine that the Sahaba had any kind of deficiency in their deen? We cannot imagine that. But when the Prophet was asked about certain individuals, a woman came to the Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, these 2 proposals came to me. What do you think of them? The Prophet ﷺ, he said about one of them, he's sa'aluk. He doesn't have any money. He's penniless. And the other one, the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, La yadaw asahu an atiki. He doesn't take his stick off his shoulder. One interpretation of that, according to the scholars, is that he was an abusive person. And another interpretation, kana kathira safar, he used to travel a lot. But we see from this honest answer from the Prophet ﷺ about certain individuals, Sahaba no less, that he was very honest about their mannerisms, about their weaknesses, and we have to gauge everything when it comes to giving our sisters and daughters in marriage. Yes, deen is at the forefront, but we should not neglect the importance of akhlaq. And once we find these 2 qualities within a person, then we should hurry in getting the marriage done. Otherwise, as the Prophet ﷺ said, there's going to be fasad on the earth. So now we have a husband and wife. Now what do we do after that? We take the husband and wife and we make a household that now practices the religion. Now this is very important. We have to make deen alive within the household. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned this in a hadith. He said, مَثَلُ الْبَيْتِ الَّذِي يُذْكَرُ اللَّهُ فِيهِ وَالْبَيْتُ الَّذِي لَا يُذْكَرُ اللَّهُ فِيهِ مَثَلِ الْحَيِّ وَالْمَيِّتِ. The example of a house in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned, the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is done, and that house in which the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not done is like a dead and alive. So a house that is devoid of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's dead. It is like a graveyard. It's spooky. It doesn't have any nur in it. Nobody wants to go to a graveyard in the middle of the night. Similarly, when the house is devoid of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that place which was supposed to be full of peace, it was supposed to be inviting for a person to come back to after a long journey, that becomes a place like hell. He really doesn't want to go back. He'd rather just stay outside. Because it is devoid of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. First and foremost, we need to understand what is the most important dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is to adopt the fara'id, the obligations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put upon us in terms of fulfilling the 5 times daily prayers. And Imam Yasin touched upon that, and maybe some of our things are going to overlap. But nevertheless, these are important family issues. And the Prophet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in a hadith Qudsi, he said that the closest thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this hadith Qudsi, that the closest thing that a person can draw close to me with is the fara'id. And sometimes we neglect the fara'id, we neglect the obligations for nawafil. We forget the fard, but we pray the nafil. And the example of that is on the 27th night of Ramadan. You see everybody coming on the 27th night of Ramadan, thinking that it's Laylatul Qadr. It could be, but those same people, if you ask them, do you pray your 5 times daily prayers? No, don't pray. Whereas we have to understand that the obligation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put upon us, the fara'id that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put upon us, if every night was Laylatul Qadr throughout the year, and we worship throughout the night, every single night of the year, that is equivalent to Laylatul Qadr, that still cannot be equivalent to one fard prayer. That cannot be equivalent to one fard prayer, because fard has its own status and nafil has its own status. So first and foremost, we need to fulfill the obligation of the fara'id in the household, and the best way to do that for the head of the household is to make sure that he's doing it. As Imam Yasin said, that if you're not doing something and you tell your kids to do it, the kids can smell your hypocrisy. They'll tell you that you don't do it. You tell your kids not to smoke and you smoke, it's not going to happen. They're going to smoke. You drink and you tell your kids not to drink, it's not going to happen. They're going to drink also. So you have to be an example. You have to be a role model as the head of the household. The Quran should be recited within the household. A minimum. There should be a minimum that a person sets for himself on a daily basis. Himself. The wife should set a goal for herself that I will recite a certain amount every night before going to sleep, or every day after Fajr. If not, half a juz, a quarter juz. If not a quarter juz, 2 pages, 3 pages. خَيْرُ الْأَعْمَالِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. The best of the deeds are the ones that are done consistently, even though they may be small. We have to try to bring about Islamic knowledge within the household. If you ask your kids nowadays, all the names of the basketball players of the maths, for example, okay? And I concur with Imam Yasin. I don't like basketball. I don't like American football either. I'm a soccer guy. Okay, so if you ask every single kid about the players of the maths, they will name every single player without any hesitation. But you ask them the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, you ask them the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ, You ask them, how old was the Prophet ﷺ when he got prophethood? Maybe they may be able to answer that. How many years he spent in Mecca? How many years he spent in Medina? This is basic Islamic knowledge that all of us should know, but they cannot answer it. It's basically what we give priority to within the household that becomes normal to those kids. So Islamic knowledge should be disseminated within the household. We have to avoid all kinds of satanic influences within the house. We have to try to stop listening to songs, especially these rap songs, which are full of filth and, derogatory language towards women, glamorizing drugs and prostitution. This is what these rap people do. We have to prevent that from entering in our household. And I mentioned at the beginning of my speech the importance of understanding that the house is supposed to be a refuge from all kinds of evils coming into the house, right? But evil has found an avenue to get into our house, and that is through the television. That is through the television. If we have a TV in the house, probably most of us have, it's important that we monitor what our kids are watching. Most cable TVs, they have this parental blocking that you can use to block out certain channels, certain ratings, PG-13 or whatever and above it. So you can do that. So if you have a TV in the house, make sure you do that. And make sure you don't tell the kids the password, or don't tell your kids to do it. Okay? Otherwise, they'll be on it after you leave the house. So make sure that you're not wasting your time watching TV and these wasteful shows. Who's seen this American Muslim show? Who's seen it? A lot of people hesitantly putting their hands up. Have you seen how dysfunctional those families are? I mean, I watched it because there's a lot of chatter going on about it, and I need to know about it because I need to talk to people about it. That's the reason I watch it. Otherwise, I have no interest in watching that kind of stuff. But when you see this kind of stuff, and how dysfunctional the people are within this show, and basically all reality shows, it really makes you aware that, are my children heading in that direction? Do you want your kids to be like that? And if the answer is no, you don't want your kids to be like that, then you have to protect them from this society which is going to pull them into that direction. We have to keep our house clean from ghiba, from backbiting, buhtan, and we have to keep our house free from tabarruj. Tabarruj means, not covering yourself properly. And when I say within the household, I mean that when non-maharims are coming, cousins are coming, people who are not your mahram, you have to be covered in front of them. The sisters have to be covered in front of them. And the brothers have to lower their gaze in front of non-mahram relatives. And this is an illness in our society, especially in the Indian subcontinent culture, that the cousins, they say, oh no, you're my brother, you're my sister. No, there's no brother and sister. Once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a relationship as a non-mahram, we cannot make it as a mahram relationship just by saying that you're my brother or you're my sister. That doesn't work. About some relationships, the Prophet ﷺ, he describes them as poison. The relationship of the brother-in-law, he said it's poison. So the barruj within the household, it really needs to be curbed to protect the household from evil. As I mentioned before, the house should be like a masjid. It's narrated by Uqban ibn Malik, he was a Sahabi, and he used to live in a place which his house was separated from the masjid by a valley. And when it used to rain, this valley used to get full of water, and he couldn't make it to the masjid. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, this is what happens to me. Sometimes I need to pray at home. So Ya Rasulullah, I just want you to come to my house one day and just pray at my house so I can regard it as my own masjid. So the Prophet ﷺ agreed to do that. He came and he prayed 2 rak'ah in that person's house, And that person then, whenever he had the excuse of not crossing the valley, because of rain or whatever, he used to pray at home because the Prophet ﷺ had allocated that as a masjid. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said in a hadith that don't make your house into a graveyard. Make sure that you are praying nafil salat at your house. Okay, so you pray your 5 times fard prayer in the masjid, if at all possible. And then you also try to pray something at home. The tahajjud, the nawafil, duha, ishraq, etc., etc. You try to pray it at home as much as possible. Do not make your house into a masjid. We need to encourage our women also to get up for tahajjud. Aisha radiallahu anha says that the Prophet ﷺ, he used to get up for tahajjud and he used to pray with her, and he used to wake Aisha radiallahu anha up. Said to her, Qumi fa'awtiri ya Aisha. Wake up and pray your witr, O Aisha. And the Prophet ﷺ also said, رحم الله رجلا قام من الليل فصلى فأيقظ امرأته فصلت فإن أبت نضح في وجهها الماء فإن أبت نضح في وجهها الماء. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon that person who gets up in the middle of the night, prays tahajjud, and he also wakes up his wife. And if she refuses, he sprinkles water on her face to wake her up. Just imagine if you did that. Husbands. You probably get a slap in the face, right? Was that? Yeah. And we need to encourage our sisters also to give sadaqah. As the Prophet ﷺ, he encouraged the women to give sadaqah. He said, Ya ma'ashar al-nisa, tasaddaqna fa inni ra'aytukunna akthar ahli an-nar. Make sure you give sadaqah because I saw you that you were the most dwellers of the hellfire. Finally, I'm going to wrap it up because it's getting a little bit long. The environment that we create for our children, it has to be, as Imam Yasin also touched upon the subject, it has to be surrounded by pious people. In the dua of Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, he says, رَبِّ اغْفِرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيَّ وَلِمَنْ دَخَلَ بَيْتِيَ مُؤْمِنًا وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. O people, O Allah, forgive me and my parents and whoever enters my house in the state of Iman, and for the people of Iman, men of Iman, and for the women of Iman. So the point is, لِمَنْ دَخَلَ بَيْتِيَ مُؤْمِنًا, the person who enters my house in the state of Iman. We need to surround ourselves with people of Iman. You know, there's a very famous book. It's called Think and Grow Rich. Who's heard of that book? Who's heard of that book? I think all of you have. It's a very famous book by Napoleon Hill. Think and Grow Rich? No? It's a very famous book. People who's into management and all that kind of stuff, they read this book. Who's read this book? No? There's one person? Anybody else? There's another person? There's another one? Slowly the hands are coming up. It's okay to be rich. There's nothing wrong with it. Okay? But in this book, I haven't read the book, but I've heard portions of it. He says, the author says, that if you want to be rich, you have to surround yourself with people who are rich. Why? Because they have a mindset. They have a way in their lives to become rich. If we want Iman, we need to surround ourselves with people of Iman. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, لَا يَأْكُلْ طَعَامَكَ إِلَّا تَقِيٌّ, that only a taqi, a person who has taqwa, he should eat your food. What does that mean? That the person who comes to your house, it is a sign of your love for him that he came to your house and he's eating your food. So if he's a fajr, if he's a person who is away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you love this person, it says a lot about your iman too. But the person who comes to your house, he has taqwa, he has Islam in his life, he has the sunnah in his life, he is observing the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of the Prophet. He's living a lifestyle which is something that we look up to and we love and appreciate. That tells us that we also want to live that same lifestyle. We want to be like that person. Okay, so that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, لَا يَأْكُلْ طَعَامَكَ إِلَّا تَقِيٌّ. And that example that you've probably heard many, many times before, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the example of a good friend and a bad friend, very good example, said a bad friend is like Nafikh al-Gir, the person who blows the bellows, the blacksmith. Have you ever been to a place where there's a lot of smoke? Okay, somebody was burning bafur in the room out there. I don't know what happened, it didn't work out very well. It smelled like somebody had set a fire someplace. But when you go to a place where there's a lot of smoke, I'm sure all of you have done barbecues before, right? What happens is that your clothes, they start smelling of smoke. You start sweating, and sometimes the sparks fly out of the barbecue and they burn your clothes. That is the example of a bad company, of a bad friend. And the Prophet ﷺ gave the example of a good friend as Hamilul Misk, a person who is the carrier of musk, who sells perfume. That is a good friend. Okay? A good friend, he is like the person who is selling musk, that even if you sit with him, you don't even use the perfume, but by sitting with him, the good smells are going to come into your clothes, and you're going to leave at the end of the day with nice smelling clothes. So that is the environment that we need to make for our children. They should have good friends, they need to have good company, and that in turn will make, inshallah, a good household. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us all the tawfiq to understand and practice what has been said and heard. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings peace in our households and makes them true masakin in which we can live peacefully, inshallah. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tawfiq to practice, inshallah.